Before talking about current events, let me give you a short version of Venezuela's recent history. I should warn you that this is very simplified and not fully precise. If you are interested in the topic, you should look for additional sources. In the 1920s, oil production began in Venezuela, and by the 1950s oil had become the backbone of the economy. Revenue from oil exports led to rapid economic growth. Venezuela became not only the richest country in Latin America, but also reached income levels comparable to European countries such as Italy and France. Major cities were modernized, new jobs were created, and subsidies supported families. The country attracted many migrants from Colombia, Portugal, and Italy. Prosperity peaked in the 1970s, when oil prices rose due to the OPEC embargo against countries allied with Israel. Venezuela earned the nickname, the shining star of Latin America. However, in the 1980s oil prices fell sharply. By that time, Venezuela was heavily dependent on oil and had done little to develop other sectors of the economy, relying instead on imports. As a result, the country faced rising debt and soaring prices. Inflation reached 84% by 1989. Riots broke out in Caracas over price increases, and hundreds of people were killed. Despite this, the country made no serious attempt to reduce its dependence on oil. By the late 1990s, oil revenues were still masking deep structural problems. The government spent money on subsidies and social programs while failing to develop other sectors. Inequality worsened, the Gini coefficient reached 0.49. Poorer parts of the population felt excluded from the country's wealth. This inequality fueled resentment and helped bring Hugo Chavez to power. Promising to fight corruption and inequality, Chavez won the 1998 election with 56% of the vote. Chavez nationalized the state oil company PDVSA, firing thousands of skilled employees in 2002 to 2003 and effectively taking over other oil projects from Western companies. He strongly criticized the United States and strengthened ties with Russia, China, and Cuba. He used high oil prices, up to $147 per barrel in 2008, to fund social programs, medical clinics in poor neighborhoods, schools, and subsidized food. These programs reduced poverty, from 50% in 1999 to 27% in 2006. Life genuinely improved for the poor, especially for women, due to better access to education and jobs. At the same time, oil production fell from 3.5 million barrels per day in 1998 to 2.5 million by 2013, because the industry was increasingly run by Chavez loyalists rather than professionals. Imports grew, while domestic production declined even further. After Chavez died of cancer in 2013, Nicolas Maduro became president. Maduro continued Chavez's policies, tightening control over the economy and society. Even then, people began leaving Venezuela. At first, these were mostly educated, middle-class citizens who were effectively being squeezed in favor of the poor. Due to a lack of investment, poor maintenance, and widespread corruption among managers, oil production kept falling. In 2016, oil prices collapsed, from around $100 to under $30 per barrel. In 2017, Venezuela defaulted on about $60 billion in debt. In 2018, inflation reached 1.7 million%. Hyperinflation destroyed the bolivar, store shelves were empty, and cash was weighed on scales instead of being counted. Millions of people fell into extreme poverty, lacking food, water, medicine, and electricity. Mass migration began, this time not in search of a better life, but to escape hunger. In total, more than 20% of the population left the country. Between 2013 and 2021, GDP fell by 80%. It is important to note that until 2017, the United States did not impose the kind of serious economic sanctions that supporters of socialism like to blame everything on. Before that, only targeted sanctions were imposed on a small number of top Venezuelan officials. Oil production was falling not because of sanctions, but because of mismanagement and theft by Venezuela's own elites. From 2017 onward, and especially after 2019, the U.S. imposed broader economic sanctions on Venezuela's oil and financial sectors, further limiting oil revenues and cutting the country off from the global banking system. Maduro turned to Russia, China, Turkey, and Iran for help. These countries provided loans, technology, and grey market schemes for selling oil, such as shipping it on shadow fleet tankers, methods that Russia itself later used to bypass European sanctions related to the war in Ukraine. Imports declined, and inflation remained high, around 180% in 2023. Venezuelan authorities began turning a blind eye to the use of US dollars, leading to partial dollarization of the economy. This stabilized prices but increased inequality. Remittances from migrants to relatives, about $4 billion per year, became an important economic lifeline. A small elite with access to dollars lived relatively well, buying imported goods, while most people struggled to survive. Elderly people without remittances were left on the edge of survival. Infrastructure collapsed, and water and electricity outages became more frequent. Oil production continued to fall, dropping as low as 400,000 barrels per day. For comparison, in the late 1990s it was about 3.5 million barrels per day, a nearly tenfold decline. In the 2024 election, opposition candidate Edmundo Gonzalez won, but Maduro refused to step down and arrested opposition figures. According to government statements, oil production increased to 900,000 barrels per day. Official statistics showed modest GDP growth, around 6%. However, infrastructure remained in ruins and wages stayed extremely low. The crisis stabilized but did not disappear. Dollarization improved access to goods in cities, but the country continued to suffer from power and water outages. Healthcare and education deteriorated due to brain drain. Nearly half of all doctors left the country, with the most competent leaving first. Hospitals now have a severe shortage of qualified professionals. Hope for change faded after the election, and many people focused simply on survival. This was the situation in Venezuela at the end of 2025. Now let's move to the most recent events. Below is a brief summary of what happened in Venezuela on January 3, 2026, based on information available so far. Nicolas Maduro was captured by U.S. Special Forces and taken to the United States, where he has been charged with narcoterrorism and will stand trial. At a press conference, President Trump outlined his vision for Venezuela's future. The country must abandon Chavismo, hold free elections, and enter a transitional period under partial U.S. oversight. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez has already been sworn in as acting president. According to Trump, Marco Rubio held talks with her, and she is ready to cooperate. Trump does not see opposition figure Maria Corina Machado as a future leader, arguing that she lacks sufficient governing experience. At the same time, Rodriguez is telling Venezuelan state television that she is not cooperating with U.S. authorities and is demanding Maduro's return. Trump has openly warned that new operations are possible if Chavistas choose resistance. The U.S. naval force remains in the region, and satellite images show that Venezuela's military capabilities, including air defense systems, have already been heavily damaged by airstrikes, meaning there would be little to stop further action. The United States plans to invest billions of dollars in restoring Venezuela's oil industry through American companies. Revenues from production would, of course, be shared with Venezuela, as is standard practice in countries where international oil corporations operate. As it was said earlier in this video, due to poor management and lack of investment over the past 20 years, the oil sector is in very poor condition and currently produces only about a quarter of its potential output. Trump has stated this position on oil investment openly, so there is no need to whisper that the U.S. is only fighting for oil. What is not stated as openly, but may be an even more important reason for U.S. intervention, is that Venezuela has effectively become a base for various opaque operations by China, Russia, and Iran, including the presence of Russian and Iranian militants, dangerously close to U.S. territory. It appears that the operation was largely designed by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, with Trump assigning him responsibility for its execution. Rubio is of Cuban origin and understands the realities of Latin American countries in general and dictatorships in particular very well. The chosen, surgical, approach, capturing Maduro and carrying out targeted strikes without a ground occupation, minimizes the risk of civil war. I believe that, unless the situation suddenly deteriorates, this is the best possible outcome for the people of Venezuela, and probably good for the world as well. Say what you will, but I think that with less corruption and incompetence, ordinary people will eventually receive more benefits from Venezuela's oil industry than they did under the so-called revolutionary government. Along with that, global oil production will become more diversified and less controlled by unpredictable authoritarian regimes. Again, say what you will, but I'm convinced that at least half of these regimes exist only because they can subsidize repression and neglect of their people's needs with essentially free money from oil exports. In addition, these decisive actions signal the return of the United States to the role of global policeman, which should serve as a sobering warning to other authoritarian leaders. Refusal to recognize legitimacy can now have very concrete consequences. But don't get excited yet. Restoring Venezuela's oil industry to its full potential will take at least 5 to 7 years, even if things go well. Thank you for listening.